Welcome to another episode of the Learn It All podcast. I'm your host, Damon Lembi, and today I've got a phenomenal guest. His name is Rick Jordan. Now, Rick is a founder and CEO of a company called ReachOut, which is a managed service provider for cybersecurity. And Rick built this company from scratch. He grew it to 8 figures and took it public, which is huge. Rick's also an author, a documentary maker, and he's got a great podcast that you got to check out called All In with Rick Jordan. And most of all, Rick's also a dad. So, Rick, welcome to the show, buddy.
My man, thanks for having me on. What's shaking? Let's roll.
Let's do it. So now, anybody who's ever talked to me or listened to this show knows that baseball is basically my whole life, right? And getting to know you and researching you, you talk a lot about how baseball had a big impact on influencing your leadership style. Can you share a little bit with our audience?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we just went through a restructuring in the company and put a lot of people just on outside sales. And literally an hour ago in a sales meeting, I brought that up again. I talked about baseball a lot. So there's going to be a lot of high fives and there's going to be a lot of WTFs. We need to go back to the batting cage as well. And that was probably the best example I could ever have from good coaches that I had planned for 9 years. Because there were times where it was like, man, you really crushed it today, Rick. But there was other times like, go take 100 swings. or go over there and we're going to loft balls to you and you need to swat at those things, or go out there, as a catcher and just practice with the pitcher a little bit. It's the consistency around this stuff is just one of the things that I learned explicitly in baseball and even from an organizational structure, man, because it's like when you take a look, and I've talked about this metaphor before, I was a catcher. That was the position I played the most, but they would also place me at right field because I had a gun, right? I also played first base, but then being in those different roles, it's like if I was in right field and there was a ball coming to me, the center fielder would come over and back me up. And that center fielder would then grab the ball if I missed it. That would always happen to where there's different people that back you up on the field. And that happens in business too. At least that's how I lead. It's like everybody supports everyone else. And there's going to be times that you screw up, but that's what it's meant to be because you have these learning experiences. But there's others that will always and are supposed to get your back. You're never out there alone. My leadership style is very much that way, saying everybody has a role. Everybody absolutely has a role, but you're never siloed in that role, and you better be getting other people's backs. And then additionally, if you have a bad game, I expect you to have bad games. I want you to expect that you're going to have bad games or bad days or horrible sales that just fall through. Be brutally honest with those and examine why they did, because there's also going to be the other times where it's like, there's nothing to examine. You crushed it. High five. So it's both sides of the coin, man. And baseball is such an amazing parallel to how I think business and leadership should be.
I love it. I love it. And a lot of what I hear you saying is that the learning opportunities in baseball, you go out there, you perform, sometimes you do well, sometimes you fall flat on your face. You got to get up, learn from those failures, but you also got to turn around and adjust right away and have learning agility and keep going, right? And just like in business, because you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And in sales, I'm always saying, you got to do the fundamentals. You got to go in and you got to do what it takes. Where do you think, as far as being a baseball coach or being a leader, how the CEO sets the culture for the organization?
Man, that's so huge. And you especially see this, because my primary mode of growth right now is by acquisition. And you can see this across the board because you can see some good owners, or good CEOs that put a good culture in place. And you can see some bad ones by how their people are, especially when we inherit them. When we take on those employees of that acquisition, you can clearly tell where the cultural goodness was and where the cultural problems were. So it's from an outsider's perspective, it's like, and it's a little hard to hear too, man. I'm just going to be real about this. From some of the former owners, it's a little hard to hear that they sucked at culture, or their company was in the position it was in because of the culture or lack of culture that they had put into place. And I'm not perfect at any of this. I don't think anybody is, because I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to actually drive good culture. You have to be able to examine your own faults, your own misconceptions about how things are supposed to be or should be. And the biggest part, the third one, which a lot of business owners or CEOs have issues with, is killing their own ego. Because if they see an issue in the company, it's like, oh, it's got to be that person's fault. When self-reflection is a skill and a muscle, just like swinging that bat, that has to be built over time. And I'm still learning, bro. Still learning to this day. Sometimes you take some hits and it's like, man, what was up with me on that? What was up with me first before I go talking to somebody else?
I think that's so important. I think leadership, what I've learned over the 30 years I've been doing it, it's like self-awareness is super important, right? And pushing that ego aside and realizing it's me sometimes, right? It's me. Do you have any advice for leaders? How do they step into becoming better at understanding or being open to understanding that they need to get better or where they're falling short?
Yeah, I think it's a process. And it's when I say a process, especially as you're going out there and you're starting to promote a brand, which is what I did from a personal brand perspective years ago. And it was, you start to say things like, oh, I'm the greatest. When it's like a more realistic view is not necessarily that I'm the greatest. It's more like I am great at. Do you see the difference? It's a different type of mindset shift to where you're focusing it less on yourself and more on that thing that you're actually doing. Because if you're amazing at something or great at something, that means you can also teach that something to somebody else. You have something to give versus if it's just, I am this, I am great, I am amazing. It's so just on you, and that energy never goes anywhere, it just stays within you. So if you can focus that outward, that's the first step, I believe, to self-reflectiveness and awareness. Because if you're doing that on the good things, pushing it out there and being like, I'm great at, I'm amazing at, which means I can teach this, then you could also be like, whoa, I sucked at, I was horrible at. How do I correct this? So I can also teach those learnings.
Yeah. And I think too, it's important for CEOs to know they can also be the bottleneck in the organization, right? So if you suck at something, then maybe surround yourself with a great team and delegate that responsibility to them, right?
For sure, man. And that's another tough one too, is a release of that control. So when it comes to delegating, if you're focusing that outwards, if you're only saying I suck or I sucked it up, with something like that, it's like, where do you go with that? Besides just feeling sorry for yourself, rather than delegation can help you when you say I suck at. Here's my solution: is I'm not going to do that. Somebody else I can hire.
Yeah. Because people don't feel sorry for you anyways, right? And the last thing they want is to see a freaking CEO who's got the victim mentality, right? And feel sorry for themselves. They want somebody who can be vulnerable, right? But also have the confidence to say, hey, you know what? I kind of suck at this, but I'm going to pull you in and I'm going to learn from you or have you lead this.
Exactly.
Kind of along the same lines, like I said, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I love when you talk about the dummy tax and learning from mistakes. I look back on some of the things I did over the years, and it's embarrassing, right? But hopefully it's an embarrassing way you could learn from. But can you share a little bit more about what you mean by the dummy tax and how it's really helped you?
Yeah, it is like you said, along the same lines of what we're talking about, where you've already paid the price for whatever it is. You've already borne the consequences. That could be quite literally on the good or the bad side. Because if you did something that was amazing and now it's like, wow, that was cool. But what if it took you a year to get that thing done? That dummy tax, you're like, well, it was great. What was wrong with that? There's nothing else you can learn. It's like, no, there is, because the price you may have paid was not one of failure, but the price you paid was one of time. And now the next person that you can teach it to, or if you do that again, instead of taking a year, it might take you a month, because you could have paid that dummy tax based upon time. And now that's shortened exponentially to where they can get to where you are a lot faster than what you did. And likewise, when you do that over again, it's not going to take you a year to do it the second time. I took a company public, dude, still going through the reverse merger stuff, finishing up the audits right now. The whole process from when I first started talking to a sponsor who actually took us public was December of 2022. And here we are in August of 2024, and we're finishing up the final audit for the transitional annual report, the 10K. This whole process has been like 19 months. And I keep saying this is my first, but it's not going to be my last. I've got other cool ideas up here that I can engage with people on. Maybe I take another company public at some point, 10 years from now or whatever. But now it's not going to take 18, 19 months for me. We might be able to get it done quite literally in a weekend. And that's because of what I've learned along the way.
That's awesome. Can you give me one thing you learned along the way that you're going to use next time through this whole process of going public?
When it comes to like the due diligence on shareholders, I communicate with them probably more than most CEOs. They're like, why is this taking so long? And it's like, yeah, I'm going to let you know. So here's why this equity portion is taking so long. We found out that somebody, the previous owner of this shell, if you want to call it that, gave away 5% of the company like 3 years ago. And it was in this document as we're going through the audit. So we've had to settle that. And that, of course, affects all the equity transactions and all of this. It's like, so when I say like a robust due diligence process, I don't think that you can ever uncover everything before you take over a company. But going through this, it's like we kept getting better. But there's also some things where it's like, oh man, we've never encountered this before. Now that we have, we know not what to do next time. So it's due diligence is a thing, and it's, I guess a lot of it is like, if it feels too fast, it probably is. And slow it down, dive into it a little deeper. It's not that you can't recover from this stuff, because I think that pretty much anything you can recover from in business, especially with sales, brother. I mean, almost everything is solved by more revenue, right?
Hey, I heard you say sell more shit.
That was one of my board members, bro. That's it. It's like, dude, we need a credit facility or something. He's like, Rick, just go sell more shit.
That's what I tell my sales team. We missed our quarterly numbers. They said, what do you think we should do? I said, you need to sell more shit. That's what we need to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Rick, my dad always said, you would have loved him. I got a question about your dad in a second, too. My dad was amazing. Huge real estate guy, right? But when he's looking at my business, I would say, well, I could cut this. I could do this. He's like, no, you just need to sell more. He's like, you can't cut your way out of problems. You got to be smart, but you got to sell more.
You got it, man. I love it. Your dad sounds like a good dude.
He was a good dude. Tell us a little bit about your dad, because I know that you lost him at 46, and I got this right. He basically set a legacy for you, right?
Yeah, very much so, especially when it came to how he raised his kids. And both of my parents were great at this, man. A lot of stuff I can relate back to how they brought me up. The biggest thing that they really did for me was allow me to be curious. It was never anything to where it's like, stop doing that or stop thinking this. If there was something like that, it was more of like, well, why? They would always answer the question. There wasn't a lot of, especially for my dad, there wasn't a lot of because I told you so. There was always a reason behind it. Yeah, and it's someone told me one time I was actually going to join the Marines and be a cop as my first career choice. I should say my second, because when I was 7, I wanted to be a tornado chaser, right? Go see the movie Twisters, by the way. It's pretty great. I got declined because of a medical history of asthma. And a buddy of mine who was a Marine, 10 years older than me at the time, and he's like, you wouldn't have made a good Marine anyways. I'm like, oh, that's an ego hit. What the hell, dude? And he's like, well, you would have always asked why. If somebody said, go attack that hill, you would have been like, why? Is there a reason we have to hit this head on? Because I saw like this little path on the side over there that I think we can sneak around and just nuke all the guys that are there. It's like, no, it's like you have to follow orders. There's not a lot of leeway for somebody to question when you're in situations like that. And I can see what he was saying, because I mean, even in business, there's certain times where you have to be in reactive mode. And then there's times as a CEO, you need to give clear direction, and there's not a lot of room for people to give feedback, because there might be a fire you have to put out. Most of the time, you should allow that feedback and allow people to ask why, even if it's just a short period of time. So, I mean, if it's like, go attack that hill, and it's like, okay, I think there should be time to be like, well, what about that side road over there? That's a better way in, a quick 5 seconds. But this comes back to like, if it feels too fast, it probably is. So slow down. But that's one of the biggest things that my dad did for me, was allow me to be curious and always answer my questions. So he never phrased it this way, but for my kids, it's always, if they were old enough to ask the questions, they were old enough to know the answers.
I love that, man. I love that. And, but I think what I hear you saying as we wrap up here is like, well, one is be curious, right? Again, that goes back to, be curious, because you don't have to do things the way that it was supposed to be always done. And I think the younger generations, even though they can be tough to work with, I mean, they love asking that question, why?
They do. And sometimes I'll be real. It's like on the flip side of it, it's like, okay, Rick, you're going to have a lot of patience today.
Oh, dude. Hey, Rick, every time I ever do any kind of talk, the first thing people want to talk to me on the side was like, how do we deal with this? How do you have enough patience?
I think it's something, again, that was instilled because I saw my parents have a lot of patience. But for parents out there, for CEOs out there, and this is full circle, it's the culture thing, whether it's in the business or whether it's at your home. If you want other people to have patience with you, or you want your kids or your employees to have patience as they become parents and leaders, that's an environment that you have to create and set the tone yourself. And it's even that's this is so self-reflective and so Freudian when I'm going to say this. That also means you have to have patience with yourself. Just like what we were talking about at the beginning. It's I am great at or I suck at. And both of those require patience for you to get through either of those.
We're too hard on ourselves sometimes. I know I am. I'm a super competitive guy, and sometimes it's like give yourself a break. But I mean, you're awesome, and I love the work you do and everything you talk about. Anything else? I know we got to wrap up here, but anything else you want to leave our audience with?
The key to winning is just simply not quitting.
Yeah.
Resilience is the thing that I think that separates the winners from the losers. And coming back to baseball, it's like, we are keeping score, dude. We absolutely are. We're putting runs up on the boards. That's what we have to do.
We are keeping score. I got a 3-year-old kid, and when he gets on the baseball field, we're going to be keeping score. You have to be competitive, right? You don't have to, if you don't win, go back and figure out what you need to do next time, learn from that, like we talked about at the beginning, and then win.
Yeah, right on.
Anyways, Rick, I love you, man. This has been awesome. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, you can go. Instagram's my biggest platform at Mr. Rick Jordan. It's also Mr. Rick Jordan on LinkedIn, which is my second biggest. So you got the regular and the business side going there. Yep. Dude, I love your show. Thank you. Thank you.
And check out his podcast, All In with Rick Jordan. So thank you again today. And listeners, if you got value out of our time, which I'm sure you did, please like and subscribe, tell a friend, rate and review. And until next time, stay curious and keep growing. Have a good day, everybody. See ya.